So there's a little bit of a tension right now in the culture when it comes to how much we should be working and how hard we should be working. Some people will say, oh, don't work too hard. You have to have a balanced life. If you work so hard, you're going to burn out and then you're not going to feel good. And then the hard work will be for nothing anyway. And then some people will say the opposite. Someone like Andrew Tate comes to mind. He says, no, you have to work hard. You have to be a man. It doesn't matter how you feel. You show up every day. You never skip a day. You never think about how you feel. And there's this tension between these two ideas. And what any Christian should do is they shouldn't kind of pick one camp over the other. What any Christian should do is they should look to the Bible and they should ask themselves, what does the Bible say about this? And the Bible is rather interesting when it comes to this because the Bible, of course, doesn't mention hustle culture. It doesn't mention this idea of, oh, we never sleep, sleeps for the weak. But the Bible does have some insights on work. Paul, for example, in one of his letters, he says, if there are people among you who aren't working because they think Christ is coming any moment now, what's the point of working? Then they shouldn't be allowed to eat. And of course, we have Genesis, early in Genesis. What was Adam's punishment for sinning in the garden was that now you must toil for your food. And so hard work is something that is clearly shown as necessary in the Bible. But is it glorified in the same way it is in modern hustle culture? Is it seen as virtuous? Now, I think it can be, of course, if your work is a work that is enhancing people's lives spiritually, or even if you're just a farmer, for example, and you're growing healthy food to help people. I think there is something that is righteous. There is something that is metaphysical about doing that. So the focus on how hard we're working and how hard we should be working, while often brought up, what I see it brought up in lieu of is the topic of what is the impact of this work? What is the impact of this work? If I am a drug lord, let's say I'm Pablo Escobar or something, and I work really hard, is that hard work just as righteous as the work of a good moral doctor who's helping people get healthy and saving lives, or a honest lawyer, or even an honest, it doesn't matter. Like back in the medieval times, they had these churches that they would build, and it would take so many years to build these magnificent cathedrals that a single worker during their time period might not live long enough to see the completion of their work. And so they're going in there and they're laying down their bricks brick by brick, and he's showing up for work and he's laboring, this construction worker, every single day. And he might not even see the outcome of his labor. And I think we've lost this in the modern West. We're always thinking about, just as a culture. Now I'm going to talk about the broad culture, not individuals. We're always talking about the stock market going up and the GDP this and the GDP that, and quarter after quarter, we always have to get profits up every single quarter. Greed, it's greed. And it's so short-sighted because we're not thinking, what are the impacts of this? How is this going to affect my grandkids' generation? How is it going to affect the generation after that? And, you hear a lot about this idea of the Protestant work ethic. I think Protestantism in particular really places this huge emphasis on the work ethic. And it's good. I think it is good to work. The Bible obviously makes it clear that man should work, but it doesn't glorify it in the same way. And it makes it very clear why we're working. We're working so we can glorify God. We're working so we can earn our due as a consequence of the fall of the sin of Adam. And it's just so detached to think that there is some sort of inherent virtue to work in and of itself, and not the sort of outcomes or the fruits of that work. Because Jesus himself, he does say, you will know them by their fruits. He doesn't say you will know them by how hard they hustle. You will know them by whether they're putting in 14-hour days or not, or whether they're always trying to climb some either corporate ladder or some other, maybe it's a sales ladder if you're on a sales team, doesn't matter. When he says you will know them by their fruits, he's talking, of course, about the fruits of the Spirit. And so while we should work hard, And we should not be lazy and fall into sloth. We should always keep in the back of our minds, what is the purpose of this work? And I think in general, too, work often is stressful and it can be painful, especially if you're trying to improve and attain towards mastery at something. And if it is so much stress and it can cause so much suffering and pain given a long enough time horizon, and you have to show up whether you feel like it or not, and you get tired and maybe you run into a problem, these things that prop up are not pleasant to deal with inherently. But if you have a meaning and you have a purpose significant enough to justify the work, then not only do those problems become much easier to bear, you're bearing them with joy and pleasure because you know that in going through those obstacles, in solving those problems, that you're attaining to something greater than yourself. An obvious non-religious example of this is patriotism. Nowadays, patriotism in America is not as strong as it was back in the day, during circa World War II or World War I, or even in medieval Europe. We are not as patriotic now because of disillusionment with the government or the system in general than we used to be, than humans used to be throughout history. And even if you look at it that way, and you don't take a religious perspective on it, and you just look at it in terms of patriotism, what we find is that people went out and they were willing to die for something greater than themselves. What are we willing to die for now? Because most people, I bet, aren't willing to die for their Bugatti. It's just a piece of metal. I don't think most people are willing to die for the couple of stones on their wrist. They're just a couple stones on your wrist. And if you're not willing to die for something, as a man, you will never really have the sense of meaning and purpose required to make life not only worth living, but to orient it in the meaning it was meant to have.